This is a photograph from 2022. It is by me and is taken around the Vancouver Art Gallery. In your eyes, when looking at it, what stands out the most? Here's another, from around the same area, from around the same time. What is the first thing that stands out about it? If you're not able to tell at a glance, what these two pictures have in common is a single example of graffiti that's placed upon them. Most graffiti is not placed where it can easily be seen, often behind buildings and in back alleys. Out of sight and out of mind, places where you have to make the conscious decision to walk down to find them. But not always. Sometimes that object is something of interest. A sign, a bus stop, even on top of another person's work of art. What intrigues me about all these pictures is what the graffiti has been placed on, turning it into more than just vandalism. This video is about graffiti. Specifically, my perspective and exploration of graffiti through my photography. Not just about the tags themselves, but where you find the tags and, more importantly, what you find them on. But I think the better question you may have for me is, well, why? Why would I want to dedicate so much of my work, something that I've been doing for over 5 years now, to photographing something that many wouldn't even take note to at all? At the end of the day, in basically every case, it is a form of vandalism. Something I think most people would say that they could do without being there. So I think it's best to start at the beginning. Creating art has always been a part of my life. Something I did but never took that seriously. But after COVID, going into my second year of high school, I started to become more and more invested into creating things in both music and visual arts. I explored several different mediums, primarily painting and printmaking. I still have fond memories of making some of these works that have definitely not aged the best. But one medium felt different, and that was the medium of photography. I always had a weird intrigue about the world around me, so after getting a hand-me-down Nikon camera from my dad, I started photographing everything around me. Except other people. Actually, it was almost never other people, but the world that people lived in that was so interesting to me. And that interest in the world rather than the people would quickly extend to graffiti. Looking at my very first photograph of graffiti, it's not very good. The framing's a bit off, and it's not focused at all. There's really no deeper reason for this picture to exist. At that time, I certainly had no knowledge of photographic concepts. I only took this picture because I thought it looked interesting. This was from a trip to Vancouver in March of 2022, which was only a couple of months after I gotten my hands on the Nikon camera. And it certainly wasn't the only picture of graffiti from that trip. There are several more examples, all which are not the best. Most of my pictures from back then were really not. But there was two pictures from this trip that I would only really take a look at after the trip was over that changed a simple interest in graffiti to something a bit more serious. These two, to be specific. Something about these just hit different, and it wasn't really until years later when I had learned more about photography in general when I realized why. It's the way they deal with focus, and how graffiti interacts with the viewers with your focus. The focal point of any piece of art is the spot where your eyes are first going to drift to. Generally, it's near the center of a piece, but not always. And the ways you can change the focal point's location to influence where a viewer's eyes are directed is important to take into consideration, especially with photography, where the focal point is often the point. Graffiti, I find, creates a very good focal point, due to the very different colors they often take on compared to the backgrounds you'll find them on. Bringing it back to these two, they both deal with the focal point in different ways. With the railing, your eyes are drawn to its center image, to this ball at the top of one of the poles. What I find interesting is this. This tag, even being a bit out of focus, still demands your attention, even if your eyes are wanting to look elsewhere. On the other hand, on the beach, completely out of a normal person's sight is this pink tag that has been clearly there for a while. Actually, I have 3 different versions of this picture. The version you see here, a wide shot, and the last where the foreground is out of focus. 3 pictures, all in the same place, in the same spot, just using different camera settings. But With these two, there's just something off about them. They feel less personal. What I find so interesting is simply the contrast. It's so unnatural in the best way possible. It takes you somewhere that you would never even think to look, combined with the out-of-focus background, creates this absolutely surreal feeling. It's actually still one of my top 5 favorite pictures that I have ever taken because of these factors. From these two pictures, my interest and exploration in graffiti would only grow. Graffiti is an extremely personal form of expression, like all art. And if you're like me and actually take the time to look at it, you may start to recognize similar patterns, shapes, or even whole designs. But in reality, it's never truly the same. There are imperfections due to graffiti's sporadic, at-the-moment nature. But the fact that someone would go out of their way to leave their mark on something was very intriguing to me. So I started to document the many instances of graffiti I would see walking around cities. Something that I slowly realized, and something that you may only understand unconsciously, is the fact that graffiti is always able to stick out. No matter what object it's on, no matter where it is, when looking at something, your eyes will always drift towards it, even if it's not your intention. Our eyes are drawn to what's unnatural, what is out of place. We have the ability to feel when something is just a bit off, even if we don't necessarily know what's actually wrong. In my pictures, I try to show the ways that graffiti is able to take away your focus. And when using my camera, I try to line up my shots to make you feel like you're there in person. And the graffiti is all you can see. To use the camera as an extension of what my eyes see. Soon, my eyes would always notice when graffiti was present. Even when I didn't have my camera on my person, and was in active picture-taking mode. It became an unconscious thing that I would just do. And from this constant photographic exploration, 2 groups of pictures arose. One's where there are multiple tags, and one when there's a single tag alone. Let's start with the former. Many of these pictures will consist of this: an object, whether it be a trash bin, electrical box, or a street pole, with multiple tags from different people placed onto it. Sometimes there's only a handful of tags. Sometimes it's absolutely covered, to a point where the object underneath is unrecognizable. These pictures are simply interesting to look at. The absolute chaos that is created when so many different hands leave their own mark on something is, in a way, beautiful. But it's also a cohesive mess. There's almost no focus in these pictures. And I want you as the viewer to feel that, to bring you into what my mind thinks about every time I see something like this. I have no idea what to focus on, and neither shall you. But we still unconsciously want to attach our view to somewhere within the frame. And I think that's why it's important to show how graffiti doesn't have focus, so that we can appreciate it when it does. And as such, this group is only really able to shine because of its tonal and compositional contrast with our second group. You will almost never find graffiti alone. As just mentioned, there is almost always graffiti by other people placed close by or even on top of one another. So tags that have somehow been able to stand alone without anyone else interfering, drawing nearby or over top of them, becoming completely isolated, gives a feeling that is only earned after seeing how chaotic graffiti can be. Personally, these are my favorite. To come across one in a weird location that you wouldn't expect one to be in. Some of these were shown off in the intro, as not only do they look compositionally captivating, but because they get down to my core interest in graffiti, seeing where people even decide to tag in the first place. As social creatures, we like being seen. We like being noticed by others, not only by leaving our own mark, but by having that mark seen and recognized by others. At the end of the day, it's the main goal for basically every artist out there, to be recognized. We want our art to be both seen and appreciated by the people around us, to see the time and effort that we have put in. Graffiti, however, exists in this weird middle ground, where it's absolutely seen by other people, but often never appreciated. Which in reality makes sense, due to how the creation of graffiti will often come into conflict with our collective idea of vandalism. Graffiti is often created on objects not owned by the artist, without the consent of the owner, which is often why objects that are already considered by others to be lesser are the most common target, which often only increases people's disdain towards it. Because of this, graffiti, which is very personal to the artist, often feels very impersonal to the viewer, despite it being basically everywhere, something that you'll almost always see, we will almost never know the person behind it, and because of that, we tend to treat it as a lesser form of art. So the way that it expresses a person's self becomes very different to how art normally does. It transforms into something that's more changed by the environment that it's created in, rather than the changes the artist actually wants. That impersonality was something I always wanted to try to overcome, whenever I did my photography. But especially in my hometown of Ottawa, I was never really able to accomplish this. And the short trips to different cities didn't give me enough time to really dig deeper into a city to really explore it the way I wanted to. That was until I moved to Vancouver. Something I try to do when on my photography walks is to see if I can recognize when tags are made by the same person. And it's not uncommon to see repeated tags in a certain concentrated spot. But spread out in different spots or even over an entire city is surprisingly quite difficult. As I have said previously, graffiti is extremely sporadic, and people will often have multiple different variations for one design. Not to mention the use of different colors due to varying backgrounds. So despite my hundreds of pictures, I have never really been able to create a connection from one person. That was until seeing one face. Looking a bit like a demon, the first time I saw it after moving to Vancouver, I didn't think much of it. Just another interesting tag. I snapped a picture of it and moved on. But then I saw it again, and again, in completely different spots, from Main Street to Broadway to the downtown core, all over the city. So I kept looking for them, documenting them as I went along. Something about this tag was different from others. You'll only ever find this face on electrical boxes or large waste bins found in back alleys. And just comparing them to the other tags on the same objects, there are differences. Everything else is messy, a bit abstract, done in a rush, contrasted to the much cleaner and what felt like more deliberate lines of the face, even if it was created quickly. This is something that they've been doing for a good long while, but for how long wasn't clear. There were some that had started to fade, due to the elements of nature, but it wasn't until I was looking through some old pictures for this exact video. There it is again, in one of my pictures from over 5 years ago in 2022, that I had completely forgotten about. At that time I was only starting to explore graffiti, so I hadn't even noticed. Clearly this person had been around. One thing that was interesting about the face is when you found one, you would almost always find another nearby. It felt as if I was retracing the steps that another took before me. I was just seeing the aftermath. So I wondered. These faces are in fact all over Vancouver, and there was no way I was the only person that was interested in finding the creator. So I did some searching, as you do. And there it was. In a newsletter from 2023 from a writer named Stick, which talks about Vancouver art. In this post, Stick talks about street art and graffiti from around Vancouver, with some very interesting examples from many different artists. And there, right in the middle, was the face, created by J. Allen Baker. Like me, Stick saw this tag around Vancouver and wanted to find the creator, and unlike me, actually thought to look, and was even able to get an interview. So here are just a few details about J. Allen Baker and their tags. This tag is not just a face, but of a character named Skid. Skid the Skunk, the main character in a punk-style black and white comic by J. Allen. Quote, "He's an embodiment of anxiety, serving as my answer to the trend of online comic strips being about mental health. Skid is this, but in a way that speaks more to me personally, in that it's drenched in cynicism and irony. The comic of Skid was created first, many years before the tags even existed. But in 2020, when J. Allen rebooted the comic with the aim of making something overtly punk, they decided to create the tags to go along with it. A spiky guy screaming at you in the alleyway really pairs well with the mood of the comic. Not to mention that tagging is crazy fun, so I do it pretty often. As I mentioned in the previous section, graffiti is an impersonal form of art to the viewer. Not in a way that doesn't represent the artist, but that it's hard to connect with the work, especially when the reasons for any specific tag being created is often very simple, making graffiti for the sake of making it, with no real deeper meaning behind it. As I often say to myself, the meaning of a work is often just as important as the work itself, and often needs as much time and energy as the art piece needed. And that's what's so cool about Skid. It's this commitment. Even if I now know the artist behind the tag, most will not. The commitment to one design is commendable, and the amount of time that must have taken must be a lot. Remember, you can find these throughout Vancouver. Even if J. Allen didn't have a deeper meaning or understanding when creating it, by repeating the same face over and over and creating this recognizable pattern for people to look out for, it's created a deeper meaning, giving me inspiration to continue to create my own art. They've been doing this for many years and will most likely be doing it for many years to come, so hopefully one day I can actually meet them in person. Graffiti is not a lesser form of art, but created in defiance of what we think art is. Similar to how modern art challenges the rigid ideals of the past, so does graffiti towards modern art. As an expression of oneself, its creation dates back to ancient times, like many art forms. Cave paintings could really be considered the earliest form of graffiti that we know of. And as we move through history, examples of graffiti can be seen in most ancient cultures, such as the ancient Egyptian, Greek, and, well, Roman Empire. These examples, however, are very different compared to what we see in our time. To really see those origins, you kinda need to go back to the 1960s and 70s in two very different cities, New York and Philadelphia. Young, marginalized artists took to subway trains and walls, tagging their names and creating intricate designs on subway cars and buildings. Motivated by a desire to leave their mark in public spaces, graffiti became incredibly stylized, with every artist wanting to have their own unique tag they could call their own. With the extremely brief history lesson aside, this video is really about my experience with graffiti and why I think it's so interesting to me. However, I think it's important to consider how the wider world looks at graffiti and how graffiti artists look at the world themselves. Graffiti emerged as a way to publicly and visually express oneself, with the benefit of anonymity. And that anonymity plays a key role, as since its modern inception, one thing has always loomed over the head of graffiti as an art form. And that's the simple fact that 95% of all graffiti is what you would call vandalism, which is a major factor in influencing how the public sees this art, which I mentioned only briefly earlier in the video. We all notice when graffiti is on something important to us personally. The coffee shop you go to every day, your place of work. But now how often does it go unnoticed? How often does it become something you just don't give mind to at all? Maybe it needs to be that way, giving it less attention so that people will be less incentivized to do it, so that our cities aren't covered in it. So is there any actual artistic merit to it at all, or are my photographs pointless? It's something that I've given great thought to over the years. So much so that especially in 2024, and the early parts of 25, the number of graffiti photographs I had taken had decreased significantly. But when I was making my portfolio for my university application, I looked over basically every single one of my pictures, and kind of realized something. If photography is the idea of capturing the fleeting moment, a short snapshot of a place, of its own unique identity that can never be replicated again, graffiti is really able to embody that idea. Graffiti will never be permanent. Like our world, it will continue to change. If it doesn't fade away due to the elements of nature, it'll certainly get covered up by some painting company. But as long as there are people walking the streets, there will always be people who will write on them as well. I think most of us couldn't imagine a big city without it, even if we do despise it. These objects would almost look boring without anything on them. It's a symptom of us being so used to it always being present, that a world without it would almost feel empty. Maybe you appreciate it less now, maybe more. But a city isn't complete without art from the people, for the people. I'm recording this outro bit while I'm slightly still sick, so I sound a little bit weird. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this bit of a deeper dive into my own photography. And if you did enjoy, please like and subscribe. This will most certainly not be the only video I make on my own work, as I continue to develop my own thoughts and views on the graffiti and art worlds in general. And as usual, thank you to Oddly Skeptical for helping me with many of the things in the video. The next video will most likely also be on photography, although not on graffiti. It'll be something different. Anyways, see you next time.